We now turn to the final part of equality, looking at non-humans. In the past, I just focused on animals, non-human animals, a bit about plants on the side, kind of a side salad thing. But recently, I've added a look at artificial beings because of advances in technology, making this especially relevant. Now, looking at non-human species, of course, we're focusing in this part on non-human animals. And although concern about ethics in animals is often seen as something very recent, that in the past people didn't worry about this at all, and it's only people today, often referred to in derogatory terms, that are concerned about animal rights. However, and this might surprise some people, this has been of concern for centuries, going way back. An early example is Pythagoras, the math guy. Interesting person. We generally hear about him obviously in geometry when they talk about the Pythagorean theorem, which some people think wasn't his, but was a follower because he was what would be considered a religious, or put in derogatory terms, a cult leader, basically a mathematical cult. In addition to his views about mathematics, and he had views like mathematical things are real, not in the sense, you can write numbers, on paper, but literally they are real metaphysical entities. He also had a view, at least attributed to him, of reincarnation, that if you died, you could reincarnate as an animal. And what people claim is that's why he was against eating meat and killing animals, because they could have human souls. So if someone, were to kill a cow and eat it, they could have just killed their, grandmother or grandfather's soul in a cow body. So concerns about animals, eating them, etc., go way, way back. It's ancient as opposed to new. So why the concern about animals? Well, animals are used in a variety of ways. The one we typically think about these days is primarily, food. Eating animals, chickens, fish, cows, pigs, etc., killing them and eating them. To a far lesser extent today, because of, we have things like tractors, etc., but there are cases where they're still used for labor. This could be cases, kind of the really old school, having horses or oxen pulling a plow. Other things, of course, would be the various uses to which dogs are put. For example, they're used in police, they're used in the military, in various, sometimes dangerous roles. We also, of course, keep animals as pets, which raise moral concerns about them. They're used in research. The subject of, in some cases, would be treated in ways comparable, kind of like humans. For example, there are studies where people bring in their pet dogs, as part of a treatment, testing treatments, etc. This is all done with kind of the same level of concern, closely to what we treat humans. But of course, there's the more infamous type of research on animals, which involves, say, intentionally giving them cancer and then, euthanizing them afterwards, or doing other things to animals. So concerns about the research on animals. Animals, of course, are also used, in addition to food, used for other commodities. Leather, of course, is still a very popular material for things like belts and shoes and clothing. They're also a source of, non-food chemicals. Their bones are used in various things. And so in addition to being, of course, food, they're also commodities in other ways. And, of course, they're also used for human entertainment. We have horse races, we have dog races. There are, of course, horse shows and dog shows. While generally illegal in most places, there's, of course, having fights, animals fighting other animals, dog fighting, for example, or people fighting animals, either trying to kill them, like in the classic bullfighting, or contesting against them, like in a rodeo. And so there are various ways animals are used in the modern world. We can also throw in plants here as well, although people generally don't worry too much about plants. They're used, for similar things. Food, not for labor. I guess maybe people could keep plants as pets. People definitely keep plants, They're, of course, used for research, obviously commodities, etc. Now, in terms of sort of moral questions, lots of moral questions here. There is if you're concerned about moral status, which a lot of the debates about animals center around, what kind of status do they have in terms of their value? The debate is usually framed about what we looked at back in the ancient days of the start of the semester, the question about value and worth. Do animals have an intrinsic value that requires us to, respect them having some kind of status on the pain of just being wrong? Or do they have merely extrinsic value, that they are merely just, things? So there's a question about their moral status. Do they have any? Are they just things? Do they have value? If so, what value? And if so, why? Then it's also often framed in the context of animal rights. Even outside of academia, people do talk, in popular culture about animal rights. And there are various, sometimes well-known groups, like People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, that advocate for animal rights. And there are other groups as well, like the Humane Society, etc., who often speak in terms of rights, similar to what people talk about for humans. So there's the moral question of, do animals have rights? And then the follow-up questions, if so, what are they? If not, why not? And then, kind of broader questions about moral limits on how we can use animals. If there are limits, what are they? If not, why are there no limits? There are many approaches to animal rights through the centuries. We'll look at, since this is a subsection of a section of the course, we're not going to spend a great extensive amount of time upon it, but here are views that I've selected because they're not the only views, but they tend to be the most common views that we'd run into out in the wild. The first one is the religious view. This is the view put forth by our good dead friend, St. Thomas Aquinas, and our even deader friend, St. Augustine. Spoilers, that God allows the killing and using of plants and animals. There's also what we could kind of call the scientific view of Descartes, or the philosophical view, although it's all philosophical. Descartes made the argument that since animals lack metaphysical minds, they don't think in the sense that we do, and they don't feel in the sense that we do. He does, as we'll see, make the argument that they do feel, but in a mechanical way. Roughly put, he takes them to be, in my terminology, like God's robots. They're basically organic machines, and they don't think or feel like we do, at least according to Descartes. There are those who argue that Descartes' view had an influence on science, the practice of science, in regards to animal research. The view being that, again, animals don't think or feel in the sense that we do. Therefore, it's morally acceptable to, say, experiment on them, etc. So we have the religious view of Aquinas. We have the scientific view of Descartes. We'll also look at kind of a different sort of view put forth by our good dead friend Immanuel Kant, which is kind of a psychological view. Like Descartes, he believes that animals are not rational beings. He takes the view that animals lack self-consciousness. They're not people, they're things. And we looked at Kant's deontological view. And we saw that in his view, you have rational beings who have moral worth, and then you have what he calls the objects of the inclination, which lack moral value. They're only valuable as means to ends. However, Kant argues, despite this, or he has to argue because of this position, that animals should be treated well. And his reasoning, spoilers, is that mistreating animals will incline people to mistreat humans. We have obligations to humans, so if we mistreat animals, we're likely to mistreat humans, thus breaking that obligation, that duty to humans. Therefore, we should treat animals well, despite their lack of having a moral status on their own. We'll also look at probably the most common view put forth for those who argue ethically for animal rights is the utilitarian view, that animals count morally and their treatment can be a matter of ethical concern, And this, of course, can go either way. You could argue for animals or having rights or against. In many cases, not surprisingly, philosophers do argue in favor of good treatment of animals. Peter Singer's famous book, Animal Liberation, makes this argument that the harms to animals outweigh any benefits we get from this, therefore they should be treated better. And so those are some of the main approaches to issues of animal rights: religious views, what we call a science view, a psychological view, and a utilitarian view. Next, we'll take a look at the religious view of St. Thomas Aquinas. So stay safe, and I'll see you in the future.